Welcome to another Weekend Pagan Perspective, this for July 21st. This is a rather, my paper from Cute Witch says vague, but I would say this is a very general type, very broad type question. Recently a group I worked with had an open event for seekers to come and ask questions and to test the waters before applying to the group for membership. Hey, I think that's a great idea, because how are people going to know that they want to join the XYZ coven or grove or group or circle if they don't know really anything about it? They've never hung out with members, they've never been in a ritual. And how do the members of a group know that they want to accept a person in unless they've spent some time with them? So I think that was a great idea. There were a few people who practiced personal paths and had pre-established correspondences already. This is not a problem, though, seeing some of these individuals take the correspondences as doctrine, and they found it a shock to see differences. I'd love to hear hosts' experiences learning correspondence, developing associations beyond Wicca 101 material. Have you any techniques for learning pantheons or crystals, etc.? And how about complexity of herbs? Okay, well, I don't know if I can get into all of that, but back to the original question about new people coming into a group, and some of them already have paths that they're following, and they're a little shocked that you don't do it the way they do it. I think a lot of that depends on the type of group that you have. There are possibly some very doctrinaire pagan groups who feel like our way is the only way, and if you're not doing it our way, then you're not doing it right. I don't think there are very many groups like that, but there may possibly be. There are also quite a few pagan groups that, while they freely admit that there are lots of other correct ways to do it, this is the way we do it in our group, and if you'd like to join our group, then you agree to do it the way we do it. Then there are some groups, such as the Cups group that Feather and I lead, that are even more open. That our approach is that there are many correct ways to do it, there are many correct paths to the top of the mountain, and just because you're not on the same path that I'm on doesn't mean that you're lost. You may well be headed straight to the top of that mountain of enlightenment. And so there are a lot of ways to do it, and I'm interested in learning as much as I can about your way, and I'd like you to kind of sample some of my way too. So in our group we have one person who is a Dianic witch, and she's pledged to the goddess Bridget. We have one person who is into Italian family craft witchcraft. We have one member who is into the kind of Mesopotamian and Canaanite, the Phoenician and Sumerian Reconstructionist paganism, and then Feather and myself are sort of kind of neo-Wiccan-ish. And then we have several members that really don't have an established path. They are still very much learning, and they're pretty much open to much of anything. So, but we all work together. This past Sabbath, we did a Canaanite Phoenician Lammas ritual. And there was no circle cast, there were no quarters called, but there was a Phoenician temple built. And so we brought in we brought in 7 elements to build the temple. We brought in cedar and several stones and gold and silver. There were several deities invoked that I was not very familiar with, but it worked. So there's a lot of ways to do this paganism thing. And I'm personally much more comfortable in a very diverse group where many different paths and approaches and pantheons are honored, and I can learn about other people's paths and they can learn about mine, not just by talking about it, but by actually doing it. Now, about the correspondences, I'm not really sure which correspondences you're talking about, but let's use, for example, the correspondences in Wicca and Neo-Wiccan paths between the tools and the directions. Most folks use pentacle or for north and cup for west. But when you come to east and south, some people use the athame for east and air, the wand for south and fire, and some people do it the other way, with the wand for east and air and the athame for south and fire, because they're drawing from two different Wiccan traditions. How did correspondences get there anyway? Well, somebody or some group of people had to think it up to start with. They felt like, okay, there's a similarity between fire and sword, because when you're forging a sword, you do that by heating it and banging on it and heating it and banging on it. So sword and fire go together. There are other people that looked at it, you know, if I have a magic wand and I'm directing energy from the magic wand, that's like fire. It's like a bolt of lightning. And so they began using that correspondence. Which is correct? Well, both are correct, because both have a valid symbolic basis, both have a fairly long history of use, and both will work. Now, personally, since my second or third book that I studied was a Starhawk book, and the way she explains it is that the East is air and sword or athame, and south is fire and the wand. That's the way I've always done it. I normally start casting my circle in the north, and some people start it in the east, and there's some groups that start it in various of the other compass points depending on the purpose or the time of the ritual. Correspondences with herbs and with stones. Folks, somebody had to discover that stuff or come up with it at first, and since it apparently worked not only for them but for the people that learned from them, it continued. But is it cast in stone? No, I don't think so. I think that our paganism, while it does have traditions, and we should honor traditions, I think that the traditions are somewhat fluid. Not that we can just make up stuff, but that we can experiment with stuff. And we can try things from other traditions, and if we find them useful or if they work, then perhaps we can adopt them into our tradition. I've begun adapting an awful lot from Mexican folk magic, brujeria. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm Mexican. I'm not. My Spanish is really, really, really bad. But I'm not Italian either, but I can cook a pretty mean spaghetti dinner. I'm not Vietnamese, but pho is one of my favorites. So I think that it is possible to borrow correspondences from various traditions if you do it respectfully, and if it works, it's possible to be creative with them. The same thing for pantheons. I'm personally pledged to Caradwen and Cernunnos. These are Celtic deities, because that's where the ancestry that I've been able to trace in my own lineage comes from, and those are deities that I felt drawn to or attracted to. They called to me. But I've worked with deities of all sorts of pantheons, Middle Eastern, Roman, Greek, Norse, and while I'm not pledged or dedicated to any of those deities, I have, maybe enjoyed is not the right word, I've learned things by working with them, by getting to know them in ritual. So there's lots of different ways to learn: reading books, talking to other people, watching other people, participating in other people's ritual and magic. And if it, doesn't really speak to you, if it kind of turns you off, well, maybe give it another chance or two, and then, maybe set it aside as something that's just not for you. And, continue on your path. Next week is Subs Week, and so I won't see you guys on this channel until August. And so, wishing you and yours, as always, much peace.